All right. Hey, everybody. It's Chanel with Keys to College, and I am so happy to be here with you today. Today, we have a guest that goes back for a long, long time. Before I go into our guest, I just wanted to reiterate why I'm doing these interviews. I just wanted to bring real people to you all, real professionals, and have them tell their story about how they started college, where they are now, and what feedback they have for students that are interested in going to college. So we have with us the Dr. David Ponton the third. I'm going to read his bio. So he joined the School of Interdisciplinary and Global Studies in 2017 at the University of South Florida and is a historian of the 21st century United States. So he's a college professor. As a social historian, his research traces the varied consequences of racial residential segregation and the criminalization of racial spaces for Black Americans in the 20th century, which includes his work on police violence and intimate partner violence. His work utilizes traditional historic methodologies as well as geographic information systems. Both in teaching and research, his interests include African American history, gender and society, and the sociology of race. As a trained educator prior to joining USF, Dr. Ponton served as a history instructor at Rice University in Houston, Texas, and a social studies teacher at Ewing High School in New Jersey. Woo woo, shout out to Jersey.
Hey, Jersey.
That's where I know David from. So, David, do you remember we were in 6th grade together?
Yes, I do. OLCA.
OLCA, we went to a Catholic school in the 6th grade, and we have been in touch ever since. We are now in our early. So anyway, so David and I also went to high school together. So
yes,
that was pretty awesome. I still remember when I saw you in the lunch line. I was like, oh my gosh, that is David from middle school.
That's funny.
So anyways, David, let's get started. So I would like to just ask you about your college application experience. For those of you who don't know, because David is not going to brag, he was the valedictorian at Trenton Central High School, and I was number 3. I never was going to be able to catch up to David, but that's okay. I got into my dream school, so that's all that mattered. And I did want to give a speech at graduation. I did. You and Fametta there was no space for me at all, but it's all good. So you're the valedictorian. Tell me, what was your college application experience like, and what led you to your work ethic, I guess, because you didn't just get to number 1 just by your senior year.
Yeah. So, okay, 2 questions. I'm going to try to hold them both in my head at the same time. So preparing for college for me, actually, there's nothing there. I had almost zero exposure to colleges, the college application process, what it meant to go. My parents didn't go to college. The only person in my immediate family who went was my older brother. He went to Rutgers and majored in biochemistry. Mm-hmm. At some point, I think I was in middle school or high school, he took me to visit the campus with him. And that was my first time really being on a college campus, other than like a summer camp at a community college. So I didn't even know what it would look like when we arrived on a college campus, and we got to New Brunswick, and I was like, this is a whole city. I didn't know what a quad was. I didn't know what a dining hall was, any of that stuff. So that was my only real immediate exposure to a college. And other than that, it was just through movies that were happenstance placed at colleges, like House Party 2 or Higher Education, which I know it's kind of trivial, but on one level, it's like these movies didn't teach me what it meant to go to college, but they did expose me to the fact that people who looked like me did go to college. Yeah. And so that was, I think, important and informative. But other than that, I had no idea what I was getting into.
Well, you were lucky to get into Princeton. I mean, seriously, not have much prep at all.
Yeah, so that's also part of the story. So if I don't think you remember this moment, but you may remember it. But it was really important for me. So in high school, it was either towards the end of our sophomore year or the beginning of our junior year. We were in a hallway, sort of moving between classes at the lockers, and you came up to me in excited, bubbly Chamel fashion, and was like, "So, what scholarships you're applying to?" And I was like, "Scholarships for what?" And you were like, "You're supposed to be getting ready for college." And I was like, am I? Because in my mind, I was like, that's something you do at the end of your senior year. Like, that's how far away from the process of the college application I was. And so after I had this dumbfounded look on my face, you went into mom mode, which is kind of the nature of our relationship sometimes. And you were like chastising me, like, David, you are smart. You're at the top of the class right now. You need to be applying to colleges. You need to be looking at scholarships.
Wow.
And so I went home that day and just buried myself in the internet looking for information about what it meant to apply to college. Long story short, I found College Confidential, which was helpful and also not helpful. I found FastWeb, which became like my base. And back then and now, FastWeb has this college matching feature where you put in your demographic information, your application metrics, like your SAT score, your GPA, and all that. And also the kinds of things you're interested in when you're looking for a school, a big school versus a small school, urban versus suburban, all that stuff. And I ended up with a list with Clemson University at the top.
I remember that.
You remember that?
That's random. That's South Carolina. What? But I remember that.
Because one of my things was, I want to leave the North. I'm tired of winter. I want to be in the South, blah, blah, blah. Retrospectively, when I look back on it, I ended up not applying to any of the schools that FastWeb turned out for me. And I think that's in part because those algorithms aren't built to respond to the experiences of people like you and me. There's no context for them. If the algorithm is based on the idea of white, middle class, suburban, educated, well-performing school student, then the kinds of results you're going to get are going to be geared towards that sort of generic application. So I ended up not applying to any of those schools. So again, another piece of happenstance with somebody in my life. I took the SAT, thanks to you.
Oh my God. That's awesome. Thank you for reminding me.
Yes, I owe you a lot. So I took the SAT. The first time, did okay. Took it again, did a lot better. And I think after that second time, colleges, I don't know if they still do this, but they'll get information from ETS or the College Board, and they'll send out applications. So Harvard, Princeton, and Yale ended up sending applications to my house.
I didn't know that part.
And so I got home from school, saw them in the mail, sort of opened them up, looked at the application fees, and I was always sort of risk averse when it came to asking my parents to spend money. We didn't come from wealth and anything like that. So I was like, I'm not going to ask my parents to spend $75 to apply to one school. So I put the application on the coffee table. I did what a lot of high school students do after school. I took a nap on the couch. My dad came home and saw the applications on the coffee table, and I had planned to throw them away. I was like, after this nap, I'm gonna get up and throw them away. He saw them on the table and he was like, oh, you're applying to Harvard? You're applying to Princeton? And I was like, no. He's like, why not? In my head, there were two reasons. One, I didn't think I could get in. And two, I didn't want to ask them to spend the money on it.
Yeah, wow.
And he was like, you're gonna apply. And you know my dad, when he says something like that, it happens. And so I ended up applying to those three schools and then three other schools in New York and New Jersey.
Yes.
So my application process, I say all that to say, was kind of just having people in my life who came at the right time and told me to do things that I didn't even know I was supposed to be doing.
Well, that's good you acted on it, though, and you weren't arrogant to be like, whatever. And I think that, do you think that Princeton were you happy with your Princeton match?
Yes-ish.
Okay.
I did not, so we grew up in Trenton.
Yes.
And Trenton is a 15 to 20 minute drive to Princeton. You can be in the center of campus in 20 minutes or less.
Yeah.
I had never stepped foot on that campus. I didn't even know that it was 20 minutes up the road. The first time I went to Princeton was New Year's Eve. There was
Mm-hmm.
a piece of my application that I had forgotten to submit as part
Oh,
of the online application. So my
okay.
dad drove me up there in a snowstorm,
Oh my
and we
God.
dropped off this supplemental piece of the application to the
Yes.
security guard at the booth. And that was
It's
my first time being
beautiful.
on the campus. Like, that's how far away from the college application world I was. Didn't even know that this huge Ivy League school was down the road. Um,
Right.
Once I ended up applying to the schools I applied to, my top choices ended up being Yale and Princeton.
Mm-hmm.
And I visited Yale during their Bulldog days. I really liked the campus. I liked the people that I met there. I visited Princeton, and I wasn't as impressed. I didn't
Mm-hmm.
feel like I fit in with the crowd. I didn't know to ask about the different kinds of opportunities that were there. It just kind of felt like this was an entire world away. At least I had found some camaraderie when I had visited Yale.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I ended up going there for two reasons. One, financial aid.
Yeah.
So Princeton was one of the first schools in the country to give complete grant-based financial aid based on need.
Wow. Mm-hmm.
And so that was
Different.
important to me. I didn't want to come out with a whole lot of debt because, again, risk averse.
Mm-hmm.
And the second thing about Princeton was that they had a great study abroad program. And I
Mm.
knew that one of the things I wanted to do was to explore another part of the world I'd never been to before.
Mm-hmm.
And it was completely funded. So that was the other drawing
Wow.
factor. So those
Absolutely.
things got me to go to Princeton. But my adjustment while I was there, it was never a perfect fit for me.
Okay, I see. And that's a whole nother
That's another
conversation.
conversation.
Coming from Trenton, that's
Hmm.
a whole nother thing. Okay, cool. So let's go back to the work ethic, because you didn't just get there by happenstance. You put in the work. This you getting into Princeton was something leading up from elementary school. And I think a
Hmm.
lot of people don't understand that when you're trying to apply to college, especially competitive colleges, you cannot start in the ninth grade. That's too late. You
Yeah.
cannot start in 11th grade, especially. So tell me about why was achieving so important to you, or was it not? Was it just like you just happen to get A's on stuff?
Um, I mean, we're all shaped by um, circumstances that are beyond our control.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that has, I think, shaped my entire life was that I learned to read at a very early age.
Mm-hmm.
My grandmother was a preschool teacher, which meant
Mm-hmm.
that I was able to go to preschool at a huge discount. And
Mm-hmm.
so by the time I reached elementary school, by the time I got into kindergarten, I was already reading well above my grade level.
Wow.
Um, I think the kind of confidence that comes from that, and having people affirm to you and say to you things like you're so smart, or right, it kind
Yep.
of, that kind of validation and positive reinforcement was important. I think that's where the work ethic came from, which was, oh, people will respect you if if you do well.
Yeah.
I like that. I like feeling good about myself, and I like making my parents proud.
Right.
I know I watched Niels's interview, and a lot of, like, he had this goal, like he was going to go to UNC Chapel Hill.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I was never like reaching to go to college in terms of my
Mm-hmm.
work ethic. It was, this is just what's expected of me now. Like, I'm going to
Right.
work hard, and I enjoy school. Um, so I think that's where it came from. That very early on, having that early education, and then being positively affirmed by people in my life through my
Boom. There
schooling.
you go. Yes. Getting into Princeton, especially, or Ivy League schools, it has to start as young as preschool, like what you were
Yeah.
saying. And that culmination of that affirmation, that's
Hmm.
huge, because a lot
Yeah.
of children don't get that
Yeah. That's so true.
at all. So yeah, even just to level the playing field, I was thinking about, getting my son some extra this or that, just so he can be above. I don't want, and I don't want to put pressure on him, but that's a whole nother
Yeah.
conversation. But it didn't seem like you felt pressure. It's just like, oh yeah, it
No.
kind of was again happenstance. You just it just naturally flowed.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if it naturally flowed as much as it was like there was the structural support was there, of
Mm-hmm.
having a grandmother who was a preschool teacher, having a family that that at that time, I mean, we're also fortunate, right, to be growing up in the 90s when the economy was right on the upswing again. And so there were a number of positive improvements in my family's like economic situation that made it possible for them to invest in us as their kids more than they had been able to do in the previous decade.
Right.
And so, yeah, I like to like affirm to my students all the time that like intelligence is not innate, it's not natural, it's not biological. Like people work hard. Some people work hard to get where they are. Some people are born into the privilege of ending up where they are. But some people work hard to get where they are, and they can work hard to get where they want to be. Like they don't have to let their circumstances dictate where they come out at the end.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're a true testimony to that. So you used to be a high school teacher.
Yes.
Right down the road from Trent High School. And tell me about your experience with what you felt those students should have known while they were in school. What were your observation of students and advice you would have given, basically?
Yeah, so I started by saying I loved teaching at Ewing High School. I loved my coworkers. The other teachers there really showed me what it's like to do heroic work. And I really, really loved the students. And there was one thing in particular that I loved about Ewing High School that ended up shaping where I went in terms of my career. We went to Trenton High School. The demographics there were high poverty, high minority. More than 75% of students on free or reduced lunch, and more than 90% minority population. Then I went to Princeton, where minorities are in the minority. And
opposite flips.
two completely opposite and flip schools, right? Yes. And then there's exorbitant wealth. Right. And I went to Ewing High School, which was my only experience being in a school that was racially integrated with socioeconomic diversity.
Right.
And the school worked. Students from different backgrounds learned from each other what it meant to come from those backgrounds. And there was this cross-fertilization. So like you have your advanced students who are applying to college. When you have that kind of culture in a school, that means that even students who aren't advanced are aware of what it means to be applying for college. And so one of the things, so part of what I observed was that having an integrated school is important for everybody.
Yes.
Across racial, ethnic, and class backgrounds. The flip side of that, the underbelly of it, is you still see segregation within the school. So we had AP classes all the way down to like general ed remedial classes and different tracks. And you could see visually, phenotypically, those classes were racialized. But you could also tell as a teacher spending time with your students that they were also segmented based on class. So generally, students who came from middle class backgrounds were going to be doing better and were going to be placed in higher level classes than students who were coming from lower income backgrounds. And so my observation is that those students who come from lower income backgrounds and who get stereotyped because of race are going to receive structurally less support than other students. And the piece of advice I have is to find your voice very early on, because schools aren't necessarily built to respond to your needs or to listen to you or even to ask you what you need. And if you know that you want to be in an advanced class, if you know that you deserve to be somewhere else where the counselors or the administration say that you don't belong, then you fight for it. That's my observation.
True. Amen to that. The teachers have so many students. And I don't see it ever changing in the United States, the ratio. I don't see that, like a 10-to-1 per se happening. And I mean, everybody has too many students, the teachers and the counselors. I know I've been a counselor at a public school before. I've had as much as 500 and something students.
And that's wild.
It's wild and it's unfair to the students. So yeah, I agree with you to advocate for yourself. Speak up. We need to, and that's what I want to advocate for students who don't realize they have a voice, and even some parents are intimidated of coming up into the schools.
Yeah, and I mean, the institutions are set up to tell you what you can't do because there are rules. Those rules were made by somebody, and oftentimes they're arbitrary. So you get to challenge them if you want to. If you find your voice and your parents find their voice, come in and you just raise hell.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've had to play dual roles of being someone in the school, kind of like the man. But then if they're coming to me, I'm like, yeah, you got a point.
Yeah.
you know?
Yes, exactly.
And
Hopefully you get a good counselor like Shamel.
Oh my God, thank you. I'm not trying to toot my own horn, not at all, just responding. But I mean, I got some things to work on too. So you are now a college professor. And the older I get, the more I realize that, look, y'all college students are so young. Y'all look like babies.
My
What
babies.
in the world? You are just an extension of high school a lot of times. So what has been your observation for college students? And I keep asking two questions. What has been your observation for college students?
My observation, so as you know, every school is going to be specific. And so I can really only I can speak to Rice a little bit, but I can speak mostly to USF. And USF is a fairly new school. It was founded in the 1950s and was built as a commuter school to really accommodate the needs of the Tampa Bay area, which for most of its history has been working class. So we have a sort of a moral mandate to serve students who would be underserved or overlooked by flagship institutions. And so what I've observed, and this is like sort of mirroring back my experience at Ewing High School, is I have a lot of diversity in terms of race, ethnicity, class, religious background, national origin, first language spoken at home, and all that's great, but they all are coming to this, again, an institution that is not necessarily built to respond to so many diverse needs at one time. So one of the things that I've observed and then responded to is helping first-year students really understand that when you get to college, we'll talk about merit, we'll talk about hard work, but we also talk about structures and institutions and the ways that they can sort of open up or close off opportunities for different people. And so one of the first things we do is we read Whistling Vivaldi by Claude Steele. It's a book about how stereotypes affect us and how stereotype threat can... Whistling Vivaldi.
Oh.
It's about how stereotypes affect us and particularly how they affect our performance in schools. And it's not just in terms of race, it's in terms of class, it's in terms of gender. It looks at studies that are done in the United States, but also studies that are done in places like France. Stereotypes affect all of us, but they really affect those of us who are put under threat in an academic setting. And so I try to teach my students very early on. When you get here, you might feel like you don't belong like I felt at Princeton. You might feel like you're not prepared like I felt at Princeton. You might not perform well your first semester like I did at Princeton. Don't let any of that be the measure or the metric by which you measure your worth.
Right.
Whether your personal worth or your worth as a student. Because oftentimes you're facing a set of unseen challenges that other students aren't facing. And those challenges are psychological, they're in your head. They're taking away energy that other students have for their work. And you're still just trying to work through what it means to be a racial minority in a class that's heavy on literature, or struggling with what it means to be a woman who's in an engineering class. And so don't let your grades and don't let your performance be the thing by which you measure your worth.
Amen. Yes.
And as you are learning to do that, find professors who have their office hours and their doors are open and come talk to us.
Like Dr. David Ponton.
Like me. I like to think that, right, in some ways I'm an instructor, I'm a teacher, and there are certain, right, I fit into a certain role. But the other thing that I am is I'm a co-conspirator in the creation of ideas. And this is the one chance in your life, I think, where you have the freedom to just be like, I'm going to think about things and think about what matters to me and what matters in terms of the impact that I want to leave on the world. And that's probably the most enjoyable conversation a professor is going to have all day. So talk to us, build those relationships, because like me, you might end up on a path that you didn't know that you could even get on just by happenstance because, you had a random conversation with a great person.
Wow, that is awesome. Just opening yourself up, again, speaking up, making those connections, especially underrepresented students too, or just students who might be first generation. And going back to that, I forgot. I mean, I know you told me before you were first generation, but I totally forgot. I'm like, that's just amazing. And, also kudos to your brother, who I know you only went on that campus once or twice, Rutgers, but still that was that exposure that you saw that was possible.
Shout out to
Wonderful.
Jermaine.
Shout out to Jermaine, you know what I'm saying? He might see this, you know, we got to give a shout out. And then your just people in your family.
Yeah.
Everybody, shout out to the Pond family because we all learn from each other in different ways.
Yeah.
And I just always thought it was great just to see your mom and dad, you know, just support you. Like I that was inspiring to me, you know, coming from a single parent household, that was inspiring for me to see that. You gave some great suggestions for college students, y'all. I need to stay connected, talk to your professors, reach out. Anything else, any other advice that you might have for college students or any other last thoughts?
Yes. So I guess I'll say this as part of a short story. So as I mentioned, I got to Princeton my first semester. I didn't do well. I think my GPA was like a 2.7 or something like that. Not great. I went in, my older brother majored in biochemistry. And again, my exposure to college was very limited. And so the only thing that I'd never, ever known anyone to major in was biochemistry. So I thought, I'm going to go to college and major in biochemistry. It's the only thing I know. So I ended up taking like intermediate calculus and chemistry. And I was taking these courses that were, that I thought were like high schools. You know, you go in, you solve problems, and you get a grade and you leave. I had two things working against me in that regard. One was I was expecting to just learn things to solve problems versus learn how to think about what problems were. And the second was I was coming in less prepared than my peers were. So I needed additional support, and the structures weren't there to give me that additional support. Even going to office hours and even attending extra lab sessions, it just wasn't there. And so my second semester, I was like, okay, let me try something different. Let me just go through the course catalog and look at things that seemed interesting to me. So I found a course in Judaic studies. Yeah, that sounds great. It was Jewish thought and modern society. I want to know what Jewish people were thinking in modernity. Didn't even know what modernity was, but I was curious. I saw African-American religious history. I was like, well, that sounds fascinating. Like, I want to read some James Baldwin. Black Power and Liberation of Theology, which was an African-American studies course.
Was
and
that Cornell?
No, that was Eddie Glaude.
Okay, nice. Yes.
Ended up taking something in Near Eastern studies on Muslims and the Quran, and then political science. And by the time I got to the end of my sophomore year and looked up my transcript and still hadn't decided what major was, I realized one thing, which was that all of the courses that I really enjoyed were cross-listed with religious studies. And if you had asked me, like, what are you going to major in? I didn't even know that was a thing. Right. But it had turned out to be the thing that I gravitated towards and interested me. There was no necessarily a clear career path from that major, but it was something that invigorated me as a college student. So I decided that was what my major was going to be. So the moral of the story is you'll go into college perhaps with an idea of what you want to major in. And you'll also go into college with an idea of like, I'm going here to find a career to get me a job. And that works for a lot of people, and it's important and practical for a lot of people. There's nothing wrong with doing it that way. But the other way of doing it is happenstance. You sort of fall into... It's been the theme of my life a little bit. But you fall into the things that interest you the most, the things that make you think, the things that make you want to write, the professors that excite you, and from there decide what your major is going to be. And that may mean you may not have a clear career path your sophomore year in college, but by the time you're done, you'll have had conversations with people who are really smart, who are really invested in you, a major that you really care about, and that'll give you the path forward. So that's a piece of advice I'd give those entering into college or those early undergraduates who are like, I don't know what I'm doing with the rest of my life. Yeah, none of us did.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, that's so powerful, giving, you know, you being transparent about when you got to Princeton, how you didn't feel like you fit in, you didn't do well your first semester. I didn't either at UNC. So, and to just to keep going and don't
Mhm.
let your grades define you. And you did something that caught your attention, and you could tell by your transcript that, hey, I think I'm going in the right direction, and it probably helped you to thrive more and feel more connected instead of,
Yeah.
majoring in something that you weren't necessarily connected to. So that's some really, really great advice that I wouldn't have even thought of. So even though I changed my major too, but that's some really great advice. And I just appreciate you taking this time. The last time I saw you was, I think, when you came to DC when I lived here the first time.
Yes,
And before
yes.
that, I saw you in Houston when you were there.
That's
Y'all,
right.
David is going to be writing a book, right?
Yeah, I'm in the process of revising the book. Part of my job as a professor is to produce research, and one of my requirements for tenure is to publish a book. So my book is in the hands of an editor right now who has sent it out to reviewers, and we're in the process of revising. But it's based on my dissertation research, which is all about looking at the consequences of residential segregation on the lives of Black people in Texas in particular, but also nationally during the waning years of Jim Crow. And really, I think, comes out of reflecting on everything that we've talked about today, what it meant to go to a segregated school, what it meant to go to a differently segregated college, what it meant to teach at an integrated space. And that really sort of animated my interest in thinking about how segregation affects our lives on every level.
Wow, perfect. Oh, thank you, David. I want to cry. I really learned a lot. I enjoyed our conversation. I hope that you all got something out of this. And again, thank you, David, and with Dr. Ponton. And we will see you next time on Keys to College.
Thank you so much.